Chapter 51. They had a late lunch in one of the floating stations at a restaurant with a great view. Although the food was pretty good, Eugene was left feeling a bit dissatisfied by the disappointing serving sizes of the meat. His meals back at the Red Tower of Magic were satisfying, since they had gotten used to him demanding large chunks of meat for his meals over the last few months. But a restaurant like this that prided itself on its atmosphere wouldn't serve the hunks of roasted meat that Eugene really desired. "Now that your body's all grown up, do you really need to keep eating so barbarically?" Seal asked. "I could still be growing," Eugene argued. "What will you do if you come to resemble Gargith by eating like that?" "I'd really hate it if you grew that large." "I'd hate that as well. Who would even want that?" While making an unpleasant expression, Eugene wiped his lips with a napkin. As the meat he had been served only came out in small portions due to the restaurant's rules on plating, a small mountain of empty dishes had piled up on Eugene's side of the table. On the other side of the table, the area in front of Seal was clear. Eugene clicked his tongue when he saw she had only selected vegetables, apart from her disliked bell peppers and carrots. Eugene lectured her, "If you're that picky, of course you won't grow up." "We can't be too sure about you, but I'm already fully grown," Seal refuted. "As long as you stop being so picky, I think you can grow a little more," advised Eugene. "It wouldn't be attractive for me to grow up too tall," Seal said, getting up from her seat. Eugene glanced down at Seal's slender forearms and shook his head in disapproval. "Although it's always good to train your mana, physical workouts are equally as important. If you run out of mana in the middle of a fight, you'll be forced to rely solely on your body to—" Seal interrupted him. "It might be because you were hanging out with Gargith a while ago, but even the way you talk is starting to resemble him." "Take that back," Eugene demanded. As Eugene expressed his instinctive disgust, Seal stuck her tongue out and laughed. "So I heard something from Father." Seal changed the subject. "Did you really use 300 million sows just to purchase giant testicles as a favor for Gargith?" "So what?" Eugene asked defensively. "Did you really eat them together with him?" "I asked Hazard about it, but apparently it's not just the giants. All beast testicles have a nourishing effect on the body. But no matter how healthy it is, how could you eat something like that?" Seal asked with a mix of curiosity and disgust. "I didn't eat any," Eugene insisted. "Really? Then Sir Gerhard will be happy." "Why would my father be happy?" "He was pouting because you kept such a good thing all to yourself." "Father, please," Eugene groaned internally. Thankfully, Seal changed the subject. "It's been over 3 months since you've arrived in Arath. So what have you been doing?" "Reading books, learning magic," Eugene explained simply. "Apart from such obvious things," Seal dismissed. "Haven't you had any new and exciting experiences?" Eugene argued. "Learning magic is a new and exciting experience." "What about Akron?" she asked. Though she had come here to buy Ancilla's present. Once they were eating, Seal decided to go for a walk around the outskirts of the floating station instead of heading down to the streets for shopping. As she asked her questions, Seal pointed to the lake that could be seen in the distance and at Abram, the royal palace. She continued, "After all, not just anyone is allowed to go to a place like that. Do you know how happy Father and Sir Gerhard were when they heard the news about you being granted an entrance pass to Akron?" "What about Lady Ancilla?" Eugene asked. "On the surface, my mother also acted like she was happy. But on the inside she was feeling more complicated." "What's there to feel complicated about? After all, I can't become the patriarch anyway." "That's just it." Seal turned to look at Eugene with a grin. "You might not be able to become the patriarch, but you're more suited to becoming the patriarch than any of us siblings." "That's just because I'm so talented," Eugene retorted shamelessly. "Being too talented is also a flaw. Wouldn't it be better for you to show something of a weak point somewhere?" Seal suggested. "I'll just say this outright because I'm having difficulty understanding you, but Seal, did you come all the way here just to warn me right now?" Eugene said with a similar smile to Seal's. This smile caused Seal's eyes to waver slightly. Over the 4 years that they had lived together, she had seen Eugene smiling more than a few times. But now he had a different look in his eyes from those other times. Eugene was staring right at her as if he could see right through her. His eyes made Seal recall when she had first met Eugene 4 years ago, back when he had accepted the challenge to a duel. Eugene had glared at Cyan with eyes just like that. A warning, as if. Seal lightly shrugged the accusation off and shook her head. "Just. I'm also feeling a little unsettled due to the recent events." Cyan has always wanted to become the patriarch. So this situation has turned out to be very good for my brother. Because of your actions, Yuad and Lady Tanis were forced to leave the main estate. If so, then they should thank me, Eugene prompted sarcastically. Mother should be feeling grateful to you. But my brother, I'm afraid that he'll just resent this, Seal revealed. Eugene confessed, that's why I'm quite fond of Cyan. His strong self-esteem actually reminds me of someone. Who? Seal asked curiously. Just some guy whose self-esteem seemed overinflated compared to his actual abilities, Eugene muttered as he walked past Seal. I know what you're thinking. Even though you're always nagging your brother, you really do love him, and even though you resent Lady Ancilla, you're still worried about her. Seal remained silent. Eugene reassured her. I have no intention of becoming the patriarch. I don't want to be the patriarch. Even if someone told me to, I wouldn't do it. For the rest of my life, I won't take any actions to become the patriarch. Don't just say something like that so easily, Seal complained. Then what do you think? Eugene turned to Seal and asked. What would you do if I someday changed my mind and said that I wanted to be the patriarch? Cyan would probably accept it, Seal admitted hesitantly. And you? Eugene asked. Seal avoided the question. My father would also accept you. Uncle Guillaume and the rest of the main family members would do so as well. If you said that you were determined to do it, they would have no choice but to accept you. Because the gap between you and Cyan is just too great. Eugene repeated, I asked you what would you do? I would also accept it, Seal mumbled through pursed lips. Though I wouldn't really feel comfortable with it. Because my mother would absolutely never accept you. See that? Eugene laughed as he leaned his back against a railing. If I say that I will be the next patriarch, someone will end up being upset. That's unavoidable. Because no matter how talented I am, I'm not an heir of the direct line. Doesn't that mean you're giving up for the sake of my mother? There are several reasons why I've given up on it. Even if you twins and the knights serving the main family accept me as the next patriarch, the Council of Elders won't accept me. Wouldn't that be the first and most difficult challenge I'd face? Seal couldn't find anything to say to refute him. Eugene continued, that alone would be annoying enough, but I truly don't want to become the patriarch. Why would I even want to? Becoming the next patriarch of the Lionheart's direct line, what's so amazing about doing that? Aren't there a lot of amazing perks? Even if I don't become the patriarch, I have the confidence that I'll always receive the best kind of treatment no matter where I go. You really are an annoying bastard. But did I say anything untrue? Let's just look at the facts. With a snicker, Eugene raised a finger in front of Seal. Firstly, I'm from a collateral bloodline. But at the age of 13, I was the first in the history of the Lionheart clan to defeat members of the main family in the bloodline continuation ceremony. In addition, I received the unprecedented reward of being adopted into the main family, and I was even granted ownership of the Storm Sword W. At that age, I could initiate my mana on my first try, and I also inherited the White Flame formula. Now, my progress in the White Flame formula is higher than Cyan's, who first started practicing the formula several years before me. Even though there are people in the history of the Lionheart clan who could reach the 3rd star before becoming adults, none of them managed to reach the 3rd star when they were only 17 like I did. Seal warned him, you really are starting to annoy me. And that's not all. After only learning magic through self-study for a month, I was able to cast my first spell, and now that 3 months have passed, I've received permission to enter the Royal Library, Akron. When I'm this talented, do I really need to turn my eye to the seat of the patriarch? Fine. You win. You really are so talented, you annoying bastard. Having listened to each point one by one, Seal couldn't help but think that Eugene really was a monster. As she looked at Eugene's slyly grinning gaze, Seal shook her head in frustration. After calming down, Seal asked, so if you're not going to become the patriarch, then what are you going to do? I guess I'll just do anything I want to do, Eugene shrugged. Did you know? Mother wants me to marry you. How awful. Seal's eyebrows twitched at Eugene's immediate reply. What's so terrible about it? She growled. You and I are family siblings at that, Eugene pointed out. Seal complained, but you've never once called me big sis. We're the same age, so who do you think you're calling a little brother? Eugene argued. You aren't going to repeat the same nonsense that you spouted when you were 13, are you? About how you're the older sister just because you were born a few months earlier, I've been telling you to call me big sister for the past 4 years. If you've been forced to hear me say it this much, can't you at least pretend to let me win just once and call me big sis? Why should I pretend to lose when I'm always winning? If you really want to hear me call you big sis, then why don't we have a spar for it? I know you've been studying diligently under Guillaume and the Patriarch, even while you were holed up in your room. Don't bring up things from the past. If someone could hear you say that, they'd think it happened long ago. Sorry, but the last time I saw you acting like you've got leprosy because you were going through puberty was only 3 months ago. Puberty usually starts suddenly and stops suddenly. That's how it was for Cyan as well. But that wasn't the case for me. That's because you're the weird one, Seal humphed without retracting her pouting lips. From the twins' perspective, it was clear that Eugene was the strange one. Even though they were the same age, his skills were far superior, and then he didn't even seem to go through puberty like they did. So what about puberty? If I started complaining about puberty at my real age, that would just be a sign of dementia, Eugene thought secretly. Seal didn't even want to think about how hard puberty had hit her just a few months ago. Like she had just said, her puberty came onto her suddenly. For some reason she had started to dislike how she looked in the mirror, and her moods would feel off for no reason. Her body odor, which she had never found unpleasant since she was born, was suddenly offensive to her. But then it was suddenly over. Ever since Eugene had left for Aroth, the things that had been strangely bothering her didn't feel so bothersome any longer. Seal spoke up. Can I ask you something? What? Eugene asked. Hesitantly she began, well, back then when I was going through puberty. You were talking about a few months ago, right? He interrupted teasingly. That was long ago, Seal insisted with a glare. Eugene returned to the topic. Whatever. What about back then? Didn't you smell something strange coming from me? Seal asked shyly. I didn't smell anything though. In the first place, you didn't even want to come out of your room because you were afraid of giving off any body odor, Eugene pointed out. How about now? I can smell a slight scent of perfume. What about the smell of sweat? With how refreshing this breeze is, why would you even be sweating? Hey, stop paying attention to such strange things. So what if people smell of sweat? It happens. So you're saying that I do smell of sweat? I already said that you don't. If you're really worried about that, you should try meeting with Gargith. Why should I meet with that pig? Because if you meet with him, you'll come to think that the smell coming from your own body isn't the smell of sweat, but instead the sweet scent of flowers. Having spat out such a claim, Eugene started to walk off once more. After standing there silently for a few moments, Seal followed behind Eugene, the corners of her mouth twitching as she tried to hide a smile. So now you're saying that I smell of flowers? Seal asked, acting purposefully obtuse. Even though your body has grown up, it looks like your brain hasn't. Eugene observed. I did spray on some rose-scented perfume, Seal revealed. Eugene just said, I prefer the smell of soap over the smell of flowers. You sound like an old man. Seal's careless teasing pierced his heart deeply. Eugene coughed and, after recovering, gestured to the downtown area below the flying station. So when are we going to buy the present? He asked. I wanted to keep looking around, but... Seal trailed off without finishing her sentence as she checked her wristwatch. Our appointed meeting time is at 5 o'clock. Eugene asked, where are you meeting back up? In front of the warp gate. Are you really heading back today? We've already finished signing the contract for WMYD. And because the issue with the Black Wizard was dealt with before we even arrived, it was decided that we would return right away after picking up some new recruits. Weren't you returning to the main estate? Nope. We're going to Ukla's Mountain. Do you know where that is? I know it's in the southern portion of the Keel Empire. That's where the Knights of the Black Lion are based. But you haven't entered the Knights of the Black Lion just yet, have you? It was decided that I would take a simple test from Lady Carmen. Do you want to go there together? Her trying to hook him into doing something without giving him any warning reminded Eugene of back when they were both 13. Eugene questioned, why would I want to go there? Lady Carmen is actually more interested in you than she is in me, Seal explained. Interested? In me? Why? Why ask when you already gave the explanation with your own mouth earlier? Because you're so talented. But even though you're that talented, you can't become the Patriarch. Isn't it obvious that the Knights of the Black Lion would be interested in someone like you? It certainly was obvious. To be honest, Eugene couldn't help but feel interested in Seal's offer. After all, the Knights of the Black Lion were the Lionheart clan's strongest force. Regretfully, he could only say, "Please tell her not to act on her interest for now and save it for later." "Why not?" Seal asked. "Currently, I'm having far more fun learning magic. There are a lot of wizards in the Knights of the Black Lion as well. Like Fargo, who came with us today, he's at the 5th circle. But Crown Prince Honian, over there in the royal palace, reached the 5th circle when he was only 23 years old. That's just because he's the Crown Prince of Arath. Anyways, I won't go with you right now. Wouldn't it be more helpful to use the time you've spent learning magic to train the White Flame formula?" "I'm still training with the White Flame formula even as I learn magic." This was the truth. Since Eugene had arrived in Arath, he hadn't missed a single day of training with the White Flame formula. "If you promise to meet up at 5 o'clock, there are only a few hours left," Eugene reminded Seal. "Don't you need to pick a present?" Seal dismissed his concerns. "If it's something that I've personally chosen, Mother will be happy with whatever it is, so it's fine if we take our time." "If that's how you're going to play it, why come all the way to Arath just to buy a present for her? You already heard me say it earlier, so why do you even keep asking?" Seal giggled and clung to Eugene's arm as she cutely confessed, "I'm here because I wanted to see you." "It's embarrassing, so get off me." Eugene attempted to shake her off. "Picking a present for my mother won't even take me 30 minutes. That means we need to use our time more efficiently. Don't you know any places where we can go and visit? Would you like to see me perform some magic? I feel like that won't be any fun just watching." "So where?" "Oh, that's right. They did say the night view in Arath is famous. Although I don't think I'll get to see it today. Why don't we go and take a look at the wise Sienna's mansion? I did that on my first day here. But you haven't seen it with me." Eugene was dragged along by his arm. "Since he said that he doesn't know anymore, then it can't be helped," a cold voice declared. They were in an underground prison cell. The smell of blood mixed with the scent of cigarettes was coming from where Carmen had been leaning back against the wall. She finally threw the cigar she had been chewing on onto the floor. They were here for Gavid, the black wizard who had been a member of the Wizards Guild. Among the many people who had been caught in the drug den on Bolero Street, those who could be killed were already dead, and those who shouldn't be killed were imprisoned. Gavid was someone who would usually be killed without consequences. He wasn't a member of the Black Tower of Magic, and even in the Wizards Guild he was nothing more than a trivial black wizard of no significant strength who drifted around the night streets of Arath. Nevertheless, Gavid hadn't died and had remained alive until now. And today he was finally being executed. But before that he had first been tortured. There had been no need for Carmen to come forward to do this task personally. Nashon, the commander of the 3rd Division, was good with spears, but he was also skilled in torture. Most of the Lionheart's Knights of the Black Lion were like that. Their fangs and claws weren't just good at biting and tearing their enemies from the front. Gavid was the one who had arranged the contract for Uad Lionheart. From what he had told them, the two had become friends through meeting at the Succubi's shop on Bolero Street. Their friendship had started at the beginning of this year, and Gavid claimed that he would always hang out with Uad when Bolero Street opened once a month. 1. This is a reference to their first meeting when Eugene criticized her for having a rose-tinted view of the world, and Seal mistook it as a compliment. "It's strange," Carmen mumbled as she took out a new cigar. "How could a low-level black wizard like that come into contact with the eldest son of the Lionheart's main family and arrange a contract for him? He must have had his sense of fear surgically removed, or he could just be crazy. He was probably just desperate," the reply came from outside the prison cell. "He first started practicing black magic dozens of years ago, but had found little success. If he grew old and died just like that, his soul would become the property of the demon folk he was contracted to, and he wouldn't even be allowed to reincarnate." Carmen stayed silent. The speaker continued, "As such, he felt like he had to try something. Even if he ran into a problem and it ended up getting him into trouble, he probably believed that he could get out of trouble with the strength that he would have gained for selling the Lionheart clan's eldest heir." Gavid had admitted as much. Throughout his torture, he had screamed that he had done this solely for his own greed. Carmen finally responded, "I've heard that Noir Giabella claims she wasn't involved in this. Although that might be the case, Duchess Giabella would surely have bestowed a reward had the incubus managed to successfully catch the Lionheart's eldest heir, and she certainly wouldn't have punished him, the voice opined. And you? Carmen demanded. I'm not sure why the target of your questions always comes back to me, Balzac, the one standing outside the cell, shrugged. Especially since I believe I have cooperated with you at every step in this affair, and I've shown you more than enough apologies and respect. Rather than believe that such an insignificant black wizard could be behind this plot, it would make more sense to suspect that you're the one who masterminded it, Carmen gave her reasoning. Although I understand why you would think that if that were the case, what would I gain from allowing this? Balzac asked, pointing to Gavid's dismembered corpse. If I was the one to have planned this, I wouldn't have allowed the risk of someone picking up my trail. I would have arranged things so thoroughly that no one would be able to make a connection back to me. Don't you think so? This incident was extremely clumsy. To think that they chose a drug den in the middle of Bolero Street as the site of their ritual. Plus, their guards were so weak that they didn't even notice a 17-year-old was following them, nor were they able to prevent his interference. Even if I tried my best, I couldn't pretend such ineptitude. What if they were meant to be caught to throw off the trail? Carmen supposed. Are you saying they're my subordinates? What reason would I have to cut off my own flesh like that? Balaz chuckled, and with a snap of his fingers, a flame was lit on the end of the cigar that Carmen was currently biting. Sir Carmen, I happen to have a lot of enemies. Carmen waited for him to get to his point. I serve the Demon King of Incarceration, and I am grateful to him for placing a lot of trust and love on me. But thanks to that, many people in Helmuth don't like how much of his favor I receive. Like Edmund Codrith? Of course he must also think of me as a hindrance. Amelia Merwin shouldn't like me very much either. In this era, there were only 3 black wizards who had personally made contracts with the Demon King of Incarceration. An Earl of Helmuth and current owner of Vladimir, Edmund Codrith. Arathis Black Tower Master Balzac Ludbeth. The Dungeon Master of Nahama Desert, Amelia Merwin. Of course, apart from those 2, there are a lot of demon folk who dislike me. In my opinion, one of them may have sought to disgrace me by using this as a pretense. Balzac conveyed his suspicions. But you don't have any evidence, Carmen pointed out. There's also no evidence for me being responsible for this incident. Really now, how many times over the past few days have I said that I had nothing to do with it? Balzac trailed off with a chuckle as he shook his head. By the way, Sir Carmen, surely I'm not the only suspect that you have? You're free to spit out whatever you've got brewing in that head of yours. Carmen straightened up, no longer leaning back against the wall, and glared at Balzac. However, with that freedom comes responsibility. Are you willing to take responsibility for your words? You really don't have any other suspects? Balzac pushed his glasses up with a sly smile. As a faithful servant of the Demon Lord of Incarceration, just as he wishes to get along with the Lionheart clan, so do I. That is why I bowed my head in apology, cooperated with your investigation, and showed you my respect. However, I am only human, so I can't fully suppress this feeling of injustice piercing deep into my chest like an awl. Carmen stayed stonily silent. I am Balzac Ludbeth, Arathis Black Tower Master, servant of the Demon Lord of Incarceration. Although I understand why you would refuse to show me any respect, in the face of such excessive insults, even if it's for the sake of the Demon Lord of Incarceration and myself, I won't be able to show such inexhaustible consideration, Balzac stated as his pupils grew darker. Nashon and Fargo, who were both inside the cell with Carmen, stepped forward to block the front of the cell with hardened faces. Guillaume also placed his hand on the sword at his waist as he watched the situation from further inside the cell with narrowed eyes. I really have no desire to cause even more discourtesy as a visitor to this foreign kingdom, Carmen sighed eventually. If that is what you desire, I'll do my best so that no one feels that your actions are disrespectful, Balzac offered. But to do that, your neck must first remain attached to the rest of your body. Balzac didn't respond to this blatant threat and just smiled. But Balzac's shadow, which was cast on the cell wall, began to waver. Carmen had been staring at him coldly, but she eventually shrugged and shook her head. Carmen changed the subject. Then it looks like I'll just have to keep thinking about it. About what? Balzac asked. About who in the Lionheart clan wishes to harm the prestige of the main family, Carmen said, appearing to have ruled out Balzac as a suspect. The Lionheart clan was far too large. For the past 300 years, except for the direct line of succession from patriarch to patriarch, All other members of the main family were forced to become independent and found their own collateral branches. And no limit was imposed on the number of collateral lines that could exist. Among these countless collateral descendants, there were definitely a few who harbored enmity towards the main family. It was just a hunch, Carmen admitted without apology. We couldn't find out anything with torture or with mind magic. It was all too clean. That's why I suspected you. Oh my, then it looks like I went too far with my words, Balzac stated embarrassedly. They'd been left thoroughly in the dark without any clues on where to pick up the trail. Hesitantly Balzac said, I must add that what I'm about to talk next isn't all that clean. And there's no reason you would trust me with this. Go ahead, Carmen conceded. If you need help then I can offer you my power. Should you wish for it, that is. Oh, that's right. Gavid's soul hasn't left this place yet. Shall I summon it for you? I don't want to see any of your foul magic and I really don't want your help with the investigation since you might be able to pull something off on us in the process. Haha. What about Alfer's head? I can show it to you but it isn't an enjoyable sight. I've already seen a lot of cruel and terrible things. Like this sight right in front of me. Despite saying this, Carmen's eyes didn't stray to Gavid's corpse. Instead her narrowed eyes were fixed on Balzac. In her opinion, the cruelest and terrible thing here wasn't the corpse that had died from torture but the living black wizard. If that's how you feel, Balzac shrugged. Balzac snapped his fingers and the shadow attached to him slowly rose off the floor. The shadow was holding out the decapitated head of a handsome incubus in its black hand. His soul was harvested by the demon king of incarceration. If you like, I can also request that it be offered to you, Balzac said. Carmen rejected the offer. There's no need for that. With a smirk, Balzac laid the head of Owen Alfer down on the cell's floor. Carmen immediately kicked the offered head. Crack. Owen Alfer's head hit the bars of the cell and shattered into pieces. Standing behind those bars, Balzac had his face and clothes splattered with blood, bones and bits of brains, but his smile didn't even shake. Let's head back, Carmen ordered, wiping down the jacket slung over her shoulders as she emerged from the cell. Standing in front of Balzac, she warned him, I'm telling you this just in case. Eugene Lionheart. We are leaving him in the care of the Red Tower of Magic. If you even come into contact with him, the only one who can command my actions and desires is the demon king of incarceration. Balzac interjected before Carmen could finish speaking. As his fingertips gently pulled off his glasses which had been spattered with blood, he turned away and said, Sir Carmen, you have no power over me. 1. Originally, Carmen says that he must have had his liver extracted from his stomach. In Korean, the liver is the organ that governs fear instead of, say, the heart. If your liver is trembling, that means you're afraid. 2. Carmen is being referred to with the knightly sir. Chapter 52. Guillaume couldn't help but feel distressed. He had known about the Knights of the Black Lion since childhood. Not only had he heard the rumors surrounding them, but he had also met a few of them. While still in his youth he had given up on competing for the seat of the Patriarch and had instead wandered the world. During his travels he had once stayed at Black Lion Castle, which was found in the depths of Mouth Uklas. They're definitely necessary. The Lionheart clan was one of the most prestigious families on the entire continent. Not only that, by maintaining its bizarre tradition, it had greatly increased its size, and at the center of this gigantic Lionheart clan stood the main family. To keep this position, the main family couldn't help but require people dedicated to doing rough and dirty work. The Lionheart clan wasn't the only one that raised these kinds of hunting hounds. But Seal. Guillaume didn't feel any qualms about becoming a member of the Knights of the Black Lion. This was something he had decided on for himself and he wanted to help his brother, the Patriarch, even if it meant stepping into the darkness. Moreover, since Gilead's ambition went against the strict adherence to tradition that the council insisted on, by becoming a Black Lion, Guillaume hoped to serve as a bridge between the council and the main family. Whether it was dirty or cruel jobs, tasks that might get blood on his hands, Guillaume would do whatever it took if he was required to do these sorts of things. It wasn't for the sake of the Lionheart clan but for the sake of his brother, the Patriarch, and also his family. Guillaume believed it was enough for him to be the only one to take on such a role. As for Seal, that little niece of his, he didn't want her to set foot into this kind of business. He wasn't sure what Seal desired for herself, but as for Guillaume, he wanted his niece, who had been following him around and calling him uncle since she was a snot-nosed toddler, to live a peaceful life free from the scent of blood. It wasn't just Seal, sang Eugene, and you it as well. Guillaume hadn't gotten married nor had children and saw each of his nephews and niece as one of his own. You would. Why on earth would you turn to black magic? Guillaume, a voice called out. While he was in the middle of thinking such bitter thoughts, Carmen suddenly spoke up as she walked in front of him. Do you regret joining the Knights of the Black Lion? She asked him. How could I? It's not like that, Lady Carmen, Guillaume replied with a wry smile. Just like how Guillaume had been looking after Gilead's children since they were young, Carmen had also watched over Guillaume's childhood. Just a few decades ago, Carmen had still been living at the main estate while a young Guillaume had trailed after her while calling her his aunt. His wanderlust was also something that he had caught from Carmen. This kind of work doesn't happen very often, she reminded him. Although you should already be well aware of this. Yes, ma'am, Guillaume acknowledged the reminder. Tasks that required someone on a captain's level to attend to them personally were uncommon. Most of the champions who led the Knights of the Black Lion rarely left Black Lion Castle. The current issue of the Patriarch's eldest son attempting to learn black magic was serious enough that it required a captain of the Knights of the Black Lion to make a move. So, what do you think the truth of this matter is? Carmen asked for his opinion. Guillaume hesitantly admitted, it feels like the Black Tower Master wasn't involved. Instead, it appears to be as he said. Someone on the sidelines is attempting to stir up strife. Amelia Merwin, Carmen abruptly spat out the name. I suspect that it's her. She's also someone who wants to keep Balzac Ludbeth in check. The Demon King of Incarceration isn't known for suppressing the free will of the black wizards he contracted with. He also doesn't interfere with every one of his subordinate squabbles. If Amelia was the mastermind of this plot, wouldn't that mean that Nahama is behind this? Lately, Nahama's movements have been suspicious. Sultan Alibur is a young piglet with a lot of ambition. He'll probably declare war within the next few years. War, this word caused Guillaume's eyes to grow cold. The desert kingdom of Nahama had long aspired to be called an empire. Guillaume questioned, are you saying they'll go to war with Kiel? They'll probably hit Taraz first, Carmen corrected him. The Kiel Empire shared a border with Nahama. The relationship between the two countries wasn't hostile, but Nahama frequently quarreled with its western neighbor, the kingdom of Taraz. Even though they probably don't have a casus belli? Guillaume asked curiously. If they need a casus belli they can just somehow create one. But if Nahama attacks Taraz, Kiel will also need to prepare for war. Of course, as part of these preparations, the Lionheart clan will also be called up, Carmen speculated. So preempting that, Amelia made the first move to create division within the Lionheart clan. Is that what you think? Even if this doesn't lead to any division, it's planted a seed for it. In any case, like what the late Gavid confessed, it might just be a crime of impulse without any conspiracy behind it. However, we can't be sure of that. That's why we need to be suspicious. Carmen narrowed her eyes and continued, I heard that you doesn't even know anything about Gavid. When I saw him in his childhood I thought you had seemed pretty smart. Could it be that the Patriarch doesn't have the qualifications to teach his own children? Guillaume sighed. He just wanted to believe in his children. A whip for the horse, a bridle for a donkey and a rod for the back of fools. Though it's pointless to say such things now that it's come to this. Instead of the eldest heir it looks like the next patriarch will be Cyan. Having said this, Carmen turned to look at the prison they had just left. Guillaume. Hypothetically, what would have happened if we hadn't overlooked Balzac's provocation back there? It would have caused quite the crisis, Guillaume dutifully concluded. Don't point out something so obvious. I'm asking if we could have killed him. I don't think what he said was an insult deserving of death. From the perspective of the Black Tower Master he also had reason to feel upset. But, if we had to fight him apart from you the rest of us would have died in there. You're being too modest. I'm not that good at fighting with wizards, Guillaume replied with an awkward smile. Just like you, I also lacked enough confidence. That's why I didn't get into a fight, Carmen admitted with a click of her tongue as she pulled out her pocket watch. It was slowly getting closer to the time when they had arranged to meet. Guillaume recalled Seal, whom he had told to meet with them back in front of the warp gate. Are we really going to take Seal back with us to Black Lion Castle? Guillaume asked reluctantly. Carmen simply pointed out, isn't that what the child wants? Guillaume couldn't argue with that. Don't overly smother a child who has already grown up so much. There was a short silence. Then Guillaume shook his head to cast off these complicated feelings. About Eugene Lionheart, what do you think of him? Carmen suddenly brought up this question. However, Guillaume immediately replied without any surprise, I'm sure that you've already heard all about him. Of course I've heard about him. 4 years ago, when the patriarch said he would take in that child as an adopted son, and when Gilead said he would open the main family's treasure vault to him, do you know just how noisy the council got? Carmen demanded. It certainly must have been a headache, Guillaume sympathized. Carmen complained, the council had already been in an uproar due to the bloodline continuation ceremony. Because the outcome was unprecedented. But it was worth it, Guillaume stated with satisfaction. In Guillaume's view, Eugene was an outrageous monster. For the past 4 years, Guillaume had taught him various combat techniques based on his swordsmanship. But, to be honest, Guillaume couldn't be sure if he had really taught Eugene anything. It was like he already knew how to do everything. According to Guillaume's intuition, what made Eugene truly great wasn't his mana sensitivity or his quick progress in the white flame formula. His true talent was that no matter what weapon he held in his hand, Eugene could wield it skillfully. Not just at the level of being a proficient wielder but with the skill of a true master. His techniques did not resemble those passed down by a prestigious family and instead pursued practicality above all else. Eugene couldn't have learned such a style from anyone else. No masters of such skill existed in Jidal, Eugene's hometown. Could it be that Gerhard was really hiding his power? But something like that was absurd. Everything that Eugene had was something he had honed by himself. He had an instinct for battle that was unbelievable for someone of his age. Guillaume had also sparred with Eugene several times. Without drawing on their mana, they had contested purely in terms of skill. Yet Guillaume had never once felt like he could overwhelm Eugene. No, instead there were several times when he felt like he was being carried along by Eugene's rhythm. But that was something he couldn't accept, nor did he want to accept. To be carried along by Eugene's rhythm? That meant that instead of Guillaume, it was the much younger Eugene who was overwhelming him in terms of technique. If only that child wasn't from a collateral line, everyone would have supported him becoming the next patriarch. Carmen's words weren't simply meant to evaluate Eugene. Guillaume felt the blatant inquiry hidden in her gaze and responded, that child has no desire to become the patriarch. In a way, he resembles both myself and you, Lady Carmen. He resembles us. If that's the case, shall I invite him to join the Knights of the Black Lion? Hadn't you already decided to do that? I intended to respect that child's resolve. It also feels a little too early to invite him right now. After all, isn't he still in the middle of growing up? In my personal opinion, he really doesn't need to learn magic, but it's not like he's wasting his time by learning magic, right? Guillaume asked optimistically. Carmen gave a cold reminder. That's as long as it doesn't cause him to drift from his path. Guillaume recalled Uid. Could that child really have attempted to learn black magic? Guillaume had yet to accept such a fact. Carmen glanced over at Guillaume's troubled face. Uid will be placed under surveillance, she said eventually. Guillaume remained silent. We have already dispatched one of our black lions to Tanis' relatives. Since he's the eldest son of the main family, Uid will be spared having his throat cut, but there will be no next time. Uid will live under surveillance for the rest of his life. And of course, his right of succession will be stripped from him. He wanted to live freely. Guillaume heard that was what Uid had said. However, no matter how much Uid wished for this, he would remain under guard for the rest of his life. Carmen revealed, we've heard that Tanis is looking for a tutor to teach her son magic. We will allow this to happen. Because if a mastermind is truly behind this incident, they may attempt to re-establish contact with Uid. Understood, Guillaume acknowledged, left with no choice but to nod in confirmation. In the end, Eugene wasn't able to talk much with Guillaume, whom he had finally reunited with after several months. He could smell the scent of blood wafting from the Knights of the Black Lion. It was clear what had taken place since they had gone to interrogate a black wizard. It appeared that he had been interrogated, tortured, and finally executed. All right then, we'll see you next time, Guillaume said with a low voice as Seal waved her hand from beside him and cried out, goodbye. For a moment, Eugene thought about what he should say to Guillaume, but in the end he just bowed his head and said, see you next time. Do you have any thoughts about joining the Knights of the Black Lion? The one who had suddenly spoken up was Carmen. Confused, Eugene turned his head only to see Carmen standing there with her arms crossed. Huh, he grunted. They say that you have great talents. If you have no interest in becoming the patriarch, you should just join the Knights of the Black Lion as soon as possible. Thank you for the offer. Currently, the position of the 2nd Division Captain's Squire is vacant. If you want, I can recommend you for it immediately. Thanks, but if you become a Captain's Squire, you can learn a lot. The apprenticeship period is about 5 years, but if it's you, you should be able to become a full member of the Black Lions when you become an adult, 3 years later. I hope you have a safe journey. She should allow people to finish what they were saying. Why did she have to keep cutting him off like that? Eugene bowed his head deeply as he said farewell to Carmen. That's a shame, Carmen said as she turned around. Before they entered the warp gate, Seal waved at Eugene once more. Has there been any word from the White Tower Master? Eugene asked lovely, and once the visitors were gone. Nope. If she had successfully managed to sign a contract, she would have come here right away to brag. But seeing that there is no news, it seems that this contract won't be so easy, Lovelian speculated. That son of bitch Tempest. Eugene's brows furrowed deeply as he clicked his tongue. Fucking Tempest, a voice cursed on the roof of the White Tower of Magic. Standing there being struck by strong gusts of wind, Melkith had also spat out a few swear words regarding Tempest. Without a single thread covering her, she was completely naked and holding a staff. By embracing the wind in this primal fashion, it had taken her several hours just to excite all her senses and maximize her sensitivity to the wind. She had feared that the wind might still not be strong enough, so she had risked using magic to summon even stronger gusts. Finally, she had aroused the blessing of protection placed on WED and personally transmitted her intentions to Tempest. However, there was absolutely no response from Tempest. Even though she had clearly conveyed her intentions to the spirit world, it felt absurd that he still hadn't replied even once. The sun was setting and the day was turning into night. To raise her sensitivity to its absolute limits, Melkith couldn't even use magic to warm her body. Her skin was forced to endure these freezing cold winds and was already covered in goosebumps. Melkith had to sniff through a runny nose as she continued infusing her mana and will into WE. She finally heard a voice, Contractor. But Melkith didn't feel any joy upon hearing it. Levin. It was the Spirit King of Lightning. As Melkith called out his name, a crackle of lightning was mixed into the loudly blowing wind. I haven't even called you, so why are you the one appearing? Melkith demanded. Put on some clothes first, muttered the crackling lightning. However, Melkith had no intention of putting on her clothes. Instead, she pulled up her body, which had curled up from the cold, and cried out, Great Spirit King of the Wind, Master of Storms. I, Melkith Alhaya, wish to make a contract with you. Levin sighed. Tempest asked me to tell you to shut up. Tell him to come here personally and say it to my face. Tempest just doesn't want to make a contract with you. Tell him that he should at least come and hear me out for a bit. Tell him that I can give him whatever he wants. Contractor. You are not able to give Tempest what he wants. What does Tempest want? The lightning trailed off. After a few moments of silence, he released a long sigh and continued, You really are lost in your own delusions. What? Melkith demanded. He wants you to return WNYD to its original owner. It's mine. I'm the owner. Don't lie. Even Tempest knows that you only borrowed it from the true owner of WNYD for a short while. So he was listening in all this time. Tempest. I am the greatest spirit summoner in all of history. I am the only spirit summoner in the world who deserves to make a contract with you. Melkith threw down her staff and grabbed hold of WE. Then she started randomly swinging WED around on the roof of the tall White Tower of Magic, her body still stark naked. She desperately pleaded, That's why you should appear in front of me. Although I don't know what you want, I can give you whatever you desire. Levin groaned, Contractor, please, have some shame. I said get out here. Tempest says, stop this vain attempt. Kayak. An eruption of stress caused the sound of a crow's cry to escape Melkith's lips. Her hair raised on end as she continued her harsh screams. The lightning, which had been watching this silently, sighed once more. Fizz. A streak of lightning descended from the sky above the White Tower of Magic. This merciless lightning strike engulfed Melkith. Kiawak. With a piercing scream, Melkith's eyes rolled up into the back of her head. If she was an ordinary person, this lightning would have killed her instantly, but as the one who had made a contract with the Lightning Spirit King, Melkith wouldn't die from a lightning strike like this. However, all the strength left her muscles and she collapsed onto the floor. The storm wishes to go northward. To defeat the Devildom in the north that no one has been able to conquer. To deal with the regrets that have yet to be forgotten after hundreds of years. Although Melkith was already unconscious, the lightning continued to mutter to her with a sorrowful tone. Melkith came to find Eugene after 10 days had passed. Eugene, who had been staying in Sienna's hall within Akron, couldn't stop his jaw from partially dropping when he saw Melkith's appearance as she stepped out of the elevator. How could a person become so exhausted in just 10 days? Eventually he remembered to ask, "So, the contract? Why even ask when you can clearly tell, you motherfucker?" Melkith cursed. Caught off guard, Eugene asked, "What's with the cursing?" "That son of a bitch Tempest." Melkith burst out. Mare narrowed her eyes at Melkith's sudden cry. She slid off of a chair that was about as tall as she was and turned to glare at Melkith. "Miss Pants Sweater, this is a place where you're supposed to keep quiet," Mare reminded her. "Kaya-ag." Melkith squawked in anger. "Ha, really?" With a sigh, Mare's expression twisted even more as she raised a finger. She was thinking of shutting Melkith up and kicking her out, but before Mare could use her magic, Eugene stepped forward to stop her. "So you really weren't able to sign a contract with him?" Eugene confirmed. "Why would I lie?" Melkith growled. "Tempest hasn't asked you to lie about it, right?" Tiok. Was she really a human? As Eugene sked his tongue, he tapped on the cloak of darkness that he had slung around his shoulders. "As long as you borrow it for the rest of the day, that would be a full 10 years though," Eugene said with some regret. Melkith hissed. Eugene offered, "If you return W to me now, I'll round it down to 9 years for you." Melkith's head fell forward as her shoulders shook. Then with shaking hands she held on to W. "And 9 years?" Melkith struggled to comprehend it. "This is nice and warm," Eugene gloated over his latest acquisition. "It isn't too hot even when you wear it in summer. How should I clean it?" "You don't need to. There's magic that does that." "Wow, that's great." Eugene really was happy to have it. With a snort, Melkith returned WD to Eugene. "Take good care of it," she reluctantly requested. "Please take care." Eugene first put away W, then bowed his head in farewell. After looking at Eugene with desperate and unwilling eyes, Melkith got up to leave. "What am I supposed to do when he doesn't even come when I call him?" Melkith grumbled to herself at an audible volume as she headed back to the elevator. He didn't really care why she felt the need to do this, so Eugene didn't pay her any attention. Hamel was an asshole and Molen was an idiot. Although it was difficult to determine who was worse between them, Hamel was at least a little better than Molen. It was painful for Eugene to even read this. Saying that he was better than that fool, Molen didn't bring Eugene any comfort. Chapter 53. The chieftain of the giants, Kamash, was ridiculously huge. No matter how straight the hulking Molen drew himself up, his height could only reach about the same level as Kamash's heel. Although Molen leaped forward, swinging his prided axe, that fool was sent flying with a single kick from Kamash. "He's strong," Molen shouted. Wasn't something like that already obvious? The beautiful Sienna raised her staff up. The light emitting from the staff was just as beautiful as Sienna. Some of you may not know this, but the giants possess the greatest magic resistance among all the races. Do you know what this means? No matter how powerful the cute Sienna's spells were, they were useless against a giant. But her foe was the dreaded Kamash. A giant that was hundreds of years old and the most powerful chieftain in all of the giants' history. However, you all should know that just because you're powerful doesn't mean you're a great person. And that's exactly what Kamash was like. He was a savage bastard who sold his entire race to the demon kings. With her beautiful magic, Sienna beautifully attempted to restrain Kamash. How on earth would you use beautiful magic to beautifully restrain someone? Eugene momentarily stopped reading the fairy tale to ponder this question. However, it was impossible to restrain Kamash. In return for betraying his entire race, that savage bastard had received a powerful increase in strength from the demon kings. A giant could already fight a dragon with just its bare body, but Kamash, who had the blessings of the demon kings on top of that, was just like a sentient natural disaster. Even the revised versions contain the battle with Kamash, the chieftain of the giants. However, the backstory of Kamash wasn't told as explicitly as in this first version. He was merely described as a bad giant. As it was a fairy tale meant for young kids, they now published a simplified version. Still, they wouldn't back down. The gentle and elegant Anise radiated a divine light of resolve. That's right. They couldn't back down. Because behind Kamash marched an army of giants numbering in the hundreds, and they were advancing towards the plains of Palmyr. Eugene could remember it clearly. The plains of Palmyr lay at the entrance to the Devil Dome of Helmuth. 300 years ago, a tall rampart had stood there, separating the plains from the border of Helmuth. To prove his loyalty to the demon kings, Kamash had led an army of giants and had come to topple the wall personally. It was impossible for any of the armies belonging to either the kingdoms or the empires to stop this sentient natural disaster. However, they still needed to be stopped. When the sweet Anise lifted high a rosary, what happened next was amazing. Brilliant lights poured down from the heavens like rain. Although the human armies prepared to stop the giants appeared insignificantly small, Anise's blessing gave courage and strength to them all. 8,000 men were gathered to face hundreds of giants. Do you think that was too few? But it couldn't be helped. To you who are currently reading this book, are you truly confident that you wouldn't run away in the face of these giants' advance? The shaking from the footsteps of these enormously tall monsters could be felt on the plains of Palmyr a few days before they even arrived. Also, the truth was that the number of allies didn't really matter. That's just how it was. Eugene recalled his past life from hundreds of years ago. Because Vermouth was there. The great Vermouth, the master of all and the god of war. He raised his dazzling holy sword high and marched forward. The rain of light called down by Anise increased the holy sword's strength. Any emotions detrimental to the battle, such as fear or despair, were erased from everybody's minds. At that moment, all the humans gathered there weren't afraid of death, pain, the giants, or even the demon kings. Anise's blessing didn't stop at just erasing any useless emotions. Any wounds would heal immediately, and no matter how long you fought, it made it so that you wouldn't get tired. In addition, it released the physical limits of what your body could handle, making your body more suitable for battle. Giants possessed strong magical resistance. But that didn't mean that Sienna's spells were useless. She shook the earth even more fiercely than the giant's footsteps and tore it apart. Lava rose from the ground and lightning fell from the sky. Molin, that idiot, wanted to test his strength against Kamash in a frontal contest. Although everyone thought Molin was an idiot, we all held back the urge to say it, and only that rude bastard Hamel actually socked Molin in the jaw. You stupid bastard. A contest of strength? You're saying that you want to go up to that savage bastard and challenge him to an arm wrestling match? Don't spout such bullshit and just stay with the soldiers over there. Why do I need to do that? If you're not there to stop the giants, all those soldiers will be crushed into pancakes by the giants' feet. When Hamel had shouted that in a fit of perplexed frustration, Molin's mouth had hung open for a few moments in a look of confusion before he had nodded with an exclamation. Oh, so that's the case. Hamel, you really don't want them to die. Why are you putting it like that? If we're going to fight together, it's just better if more survive than less. Okay, I've got it. I'll act as their shield. But what will you be doing? What I always do. It was better for more to survive than less. Of course, that was only the case when talking about his allies. As for enemies, it was definitely better if a lot of them were killed. This was also something that Hamel was particularly confident, enthusiastic, and skilled in ensuring. At that time, the knights still believed in their own greatness. When Molin stood in front of the soldiers, the knights headed over to Vermouth, introducing themselves as the knights of this rose and that pebble. When they continued to spout off the names of knightly orders that no one would ever even care about. What these idiots basically meant by saying all this was, "Let us fight together." What did they mean by fight together? It would be difficult for them to cut off one of Kamash's toes even if they all charged together. Also, saying that they would fight together with Vermouth was nothing but lip service. What they really wanted was to have their names added to Vermouth's legend so their reputation could be passed down to future generations. Besides, Vermouth didn't really like fighting with such groups. He very well knew that if he fought alongside these knights, they would only drag him down uselessly and serve as meat shields at most. This was the great Vermouth. There was only one man who was able to fight alongside that inhuman monster, and he was the only one Vermouth could rely on this battlefield. Hamel. Yeah. What? The stupid Hamel. The left arm. Can you do it? I'd prefer the right arm. Isn't that bastard Camash right-handed? If that's the case, you can take the right arm. Why do we even need to divide up the left arm and the right arm? I'll just figure it out as I go along. That's it's hard to put it into words. Although you readers might not be aware of it, it's taken me a lot of tries to somehow write this down, you know? However, if you've read up to this point, I'm sure you've already noticed it. I'm not very good at writing stories. I just write whatever comes to mind. In any case, it was an unbelievable fight. Camash was as tall as a mountain. As for Vermouth and Hamel, well, although they weren't as hulking as Mollen, they were still tall and with good physiques, but there was no way that they could be compared with Camash. However, Camash wasn't able to advance any further. When Camash attempted to take another step, Hamel slashed at his ankle with an axe. When Camash swung his arm at the pest, Hamel sliced his arm with a sword. When Camash threw his fist at Hamel, Hamel's spear pierced Camash's wrist. Then Vermouth sliced open Camash's throat. It wasn't as simple as this book made it appear. Trusting in Anissa's blessing, Hamel had headed out to meet Camash. Whenever things got scary, Sienna's magic intervened, then Vermouth would parry the attack. Without the help of the light from the Holy Sword and Vermouth's assistance, Hamel couldn't have possibly blocked Camash alone. Only the Holy Sword was able to put an end to Camash, who was clad in the power of the Demon Kings. But since the Holy Sword would only recognize Vermouth as its master, the only one who was finally able to kill Camash was Vermouth. With his throat cleanly sliced open, the blood spewing from Camash washed over the plains. It was like a riverbank somewhere had burst open. Although Camash had died, the giants did not surrender. However, the situation was still more manageable than it was at first. The Demon King's blessing had faded with Camash's death, so the beautiful Sienna's beautiful magic was able to exert its full force. This was what Eugene had felt having read this far. It was either Sienna or Anise who wrote this book. Of course, the author of this classic fairy tale was unknown, but having read this book, Eugene had figured something out. The wise Sienna and the faithful Anise. Those were their usual epithets. However, in this first edition of the fairy tale, all sorts of titles were attached to the front of Sienna and Anise's names. Beautiful Sienna. Elegant Anise. Cute Sienna. Sweet Anise. Charming Sienna. Seductive Anise. Just what were those two bitches playing at? On the other hand, Mollen and Hamel were harassed terribly. Idiotic Mollen. Asshole Hamel. Stupid Mollen. Son of bitch Hamel. Noisy Mollen. Foul-mouthed Hamel. Perhaps because they couldn't bear to attach any other title to Vermouth from beginning to end, whenever he appeared he was only described as the Great Vermouth. But it wasn't just the titles. While this first edition was incomparably more savage in its depiction, the contents were extremely detailed. It wasn't just the battle with Camash and the giants. The various events they went through in Helmuth were also described in considerable detail. The author of this fairy tale that was published 300 years ago was speculated to be a bard experienced in picking up various rumors and weaving them into a song. However, having read this first edition himself, Eugene was sure that the author of this book wasn't anything like a bard. The relationship between the characters was depicted in far too real a fashion for a book said to have been written by a bard. It's just like how I remember it. Sienna and Anise got along well. According to what Mare had said, Sienna would often describe Anise as a snake-like woman. This evaluation hadn't surprised him in the least. During their travels, Sienna had often called Anise a snake bitch to her face. Since they had gotten along so well, the two of them may have written this fairy tale together. If that was the case, it would make sense for them to have used bullshit such as beautiful or elegant to describe each other. Or else one of the two could have written it and then tried to obscure which of them it was by writing like this. Was it Sienna? Or could it be Anise? Eugene was lost in thought for a few moments. Surprisingly, they both had rotten personalities, so he could see either of them pulling bullshit like this. Still, weren't they being a bit too blunt with these descriptions? Wasn't this written by Lady Sienna? Eugene turned to Mare and asked this question rather than pondering it all by himself. After all, he had with him a familiar who had accompanied Sienna hundreds of years ago. Don't say something so crazy, Mare, who had been reading a book on magic, responded with a disgusted expression. Why would Lady Sienna write such a story? Eugene tried to explain himself. No, well. As I was reading it, I noticed a lot of adjectives that were used to describe Sienna in particular. You're talking about the ones calling her beautiful, cute, and adorable? Really now? Do you truly believe that Lady Sienna would write about herself like that? Mare asked him skeptically. Eugene hesitated. Don't insult Lady Sienna like that. Unless they're insane, who would attach such words in front of their own name in a story that they had handwritten themselves? Mare demanded. Eugene held back his urge to say something in his own defense. Even if it's you, Sir Eugene, I won't forgive you if you insult Lady Sienna, Mare said, lifting up her clenched fists. In response to this violent reaction, Eugene continued flipping through the fairy tale without asking further questions. Sienna. I've always liked you. Why is this part the same as in the revised versions? There was no way that Sienna would do this. After reading Hamel's death scene, Eugene was sure of this. The one who had written this fairy tale was a niece. Didn't they say that until she left on a pilgrimage she spent her days in the Holy Empire being called a saint? It looks like such a life must have been boring enough to drive a niece crazy. That had to be why she had written something so crazy. With a niece's personality, it was likely that she would write about herself as being kind and charming. As for why she had added this and that to Sienna's name, she must have wanted to fuck with Sienna. Sienna. I've always liked you. And in the process I was fucked with as well. That motherfucker. Eugene clenched his fists in a surge of frustration. Although he had read it hoping otherwise, even in this fairy tale, it didn't really record how the decisive battle with the Demon King of Incarceration ended. In this, it was similar to the revised versions. An oath had been sworn, and with this newly forged peace, the members of the party had left Helmuth and returned to their respective homes. That was how they lived happily ever after. Happily, it said. Eugene clicked his tongue and closed the book. Eugene's mood further worsened when the portrait of Sienna with a smile that didn't suit her caught his eye. Are you going to have another go? Mare asked. Eugene grunted in confirmation. Mare observed. While I don't think it's bad to give it another attempt, it seems a little arrogant to attempt it at your level, Sir Eugene. He had already heard something similar from her a few times before. Eugene smirked and headed over to witchcraft. The challenge needs to be difficult to be worthwhile, Eugene stated. Mare scoffed. You keep failing, so how is it worthwhile? Although she said this, Mare didn't try to stop Eugene. She was secretly interested in what Eugene was attempting. 10 days after the Knights of the Black Lion had left, Eugene had spent most of his waking hours in Akron. For the first few days he had studied the magic on the lower floors as Mare had recommended. The battle magic on the 11th floor, the fire magic on the night floor, the battlefield magic on the 7th floor, and the spatial magic on the 6th floor. Eugene had been especially interested in the spatial magic on the 6th floor. It wasn't for Blink, which he couldn't use yet, but instead for studying how to properly use the Cloak of Darkness. This cloak had been enchanted with the highest levels of spatial magic and was an amazing piece of armor in and of itself, but it could be used in various other ways depending on how skillful you were in handling it. From the start it was easy to use the subspace sealed inside the cloak. It worked just by grabbing any object and placing it inside the cloak. Taking it back out was also easy. You just needed to stick your hand inside the cloak and pull the object out. However, in order to use the cloak to rebound an attack, the spatial coordinates needed to be calculated separately. In other words, it was necessary to quickly identify the spatial coordinates from which the attack would be received and then designate the coordinates along which the attack was to be returned. Even just searching for these coordinates required high-level magic. Even though he'd held great interest in it, Eugene was forced to give up for now. Eugene returned once more to the 12th floor. The eternal hole he had seen in witchcraft just wouldn't leave his mind. So once more he went back to witchcraft, saw its contents and fainted. From his third attempt onwards he stopped fainting. Eugene's consciousness got used to the absurd movements of the mana. But that alone wasn't enough. What could be gained from simply seeing it happen? If he really wanted to gain something from it, he needed to develop at least some understanding of it. The eternal whole. The ultimate achievement in circle magic. The White Flame Formula. The Lionheart Clan's mana training scripture. I'm familiar with controlling mana, and I'm also familiar with the White Flame Formula. He thought about trying to combine them through practical application. It was impossible for the current Eugene to fully reproduce the eternal whole. He needed to at least reach the ninth circle to replicate it. The eternal whole. To put it simply, it was just a matter of holding an infinitely multiplying amount of circles inside one huge circle. By continuously reproducing, entwining, and collapsing the circles created through this, it amplified any mana put into it. Eugene didn't use circles when casting magic. He replaced the circles with his cores, the stars of the white flame formula. By rotating his 3 stars, he formed a circle. But what if he could generate multiple circles inside the circle that he formed through his method? Eugene grinned to himself as he stood in front of witchcraft. In his past life, Hamel hadn't learned the white flame formula. Since he hadn't learned magic either, he also didn't have any circles. What Hamel had learned was the cheap mana training scripture that was widely spread among mercenaries. Hamel had added his own knowledge and improvements on top of that. Afterwards, Sienna had even gone through and corrected it. It didn't have a fancy name. Hamel had no intention of writing it down and leaving it for future generations, and he hadn't had any disciples or descendants to whom he could pass it down. In the end, the only one in the world who had learned this mana training scripture was Hamel. First you built your core. Then you burst the mana formed in this core in a chain of explosions. The mana propelled by this internal explosion quickly spread throughout the body. The exploded mana wasn't released outside the body. By exploding all of his mana, Hamel could bring his full force to bear for a single second. With just that alone, Hamel was able to slash Kamash's limbs. You were born with an instinct for battle. This was something that Vermouth had once told him. You actually paid good money for this kind of mana training scripture? That was what Sienna had said. I just can't understand it. With this kind of garbage. By practicing this mana training scripture, you were able to reach the level of strength that you have now? He could do it. Eugene didn't doubt himself. He saw that his idea had some possibility of success. If that was the case, he could definitely do it. He didn't necessarily need to perfectly reproduce the eternal whole. With his 3rd star white flame formula and the circle he had created from these stars, he would explode the mana generated inside the circle. It wouldn't just be any ordinary explosion. Instead of a singular explosion, there would be a continuous chain of explosions. If he could manage to do all that as naturally as if he was breathing. Since you've allowed me to see everything like this. Within his consciousness, Eugene saw the infinite sea of mana being used to draw a circle. This was the eternal whole, the ultimate endpoint of the circle magic created by Sienna. It conveyed a sense of awe even though he had already seen it many times. By now he was no longer at risk of falling unconscious. As he immersed himself in his own consciousness, Eugene watched the flow of mana. An infinite series of circles was being created, all contained within one huge circle. As he focused on his consciousness, Eugene's mana, which was like a speck of dust within this vast sea, began to respond. Just like that. 2 years passed. Chapter 54. 19 years. This was the summer of Eugene's 19th year. Although the weather outside was hot and humid, the interior of Akron felt comfortable. Eugene's shaggy hair had been left tied up casually. Although the interior of Akron was rife with spells used to guarantee various conveniences such as air purification and temperature control, Eugene was the only one who could be seen wearing a fur-lined cloak in this sweltering heat. He didn't have any particular reason for it. It was just comfortable. Contrary to its heavy appearance, the cloak of darkness barely weighed anything. Although this fact was already obvious, magic truly was convenient. Even the small weight that Eugene did feel wasn't enough to burden him. Since he had been going about his daily training while strapping heavy sandbags onto his body ever since he was 10 years old, there was no way that the weight of this cloak would make him feel uncomfortable. It wasn't hot either. The cloak resonated with its wearer's sensory systems and constantly monitored both internal and external temperatures, ensuring its wearer's comfort in any situation. That alone was already convenient enough, but what Eugene most appreciated was definitely the spatial enchantments imbued within the cloak. And among these he got the most use out of the subspace. While spinning a pen around on his finger, Eugene stared down at his desk. He was looking at a thesis he had started writing a few hours ago. By the time he came to his senses, he had several pages filled with writing. Eugene roughly scooped them all up and threw them inside his cloak, then took out some more blank sheets of paper. "Isn't it almost time for you to get something to eat?" This question came from Mare, who was sitting across from him. Her legs were swinging idly as she sat on a chair too tall for her, and both her hands were cupped under her chin. Eugene gave an excuse. I ate a lot before I came here. But Mare saw through it. What are you saying all of a sudden? You always eat a lot. So aren't you still hungry now? I am a bit hungry, Eugene admitted. But if I go now, I'll lose my focus, so I can't eat just yet. Liar, Mare thought as she gave a small humph and puffed up her cheeks. For him to say that he would lose his focus was ridiculous. She had been watching over Eugene for 2 years now, and Mare had never once seen Eugene lose his focus. Aren't you being too hasty? Mare asked him. I really don't think so, Eugene responded. Now that the time has come to write your thesis, that's even more reason not to be hasty. You should write it calmly and slowly so that you don't make any small mistakes. Mare tried to think of any other arguments. So in any case, that's why it's better to write carefully, got it? I'm not rushing it and I am writing calmly. Though I'm not sure about writing slowly. I've been revising my thesis constantly and at least in my eyes, I've yet to see any mistakes. This must mean that I am writing carefully, Eugene replied as he continued to spin his pen in circles. Mare wasn't really satisfied with this answer and after a short pause she continued speaking. I'm just talking about normal wizards, but doesn't it usually take them several decades just to complete a thesis that summarizes their magic? The amount of time I've spent learning magic is a lot less than a few decades. That's even more reason to think that you are being overly arrogant by writing your thesis so early. Instead of doing something so rash, you should just immerse yourself in magic for the next 10 years. Mare trailed off, still protesting. It looks like our little Mare is feeling really shy, Eugene grinned as he stared at Mare. At this, Mare's eyebrows furrowed as if disgusted, and she raised both of her clenched fists towards Eugene. Haven't I told you enough times to stop crossing the line? Mare demanded. Eugene denied the accusation, but I don't think that I crossed any line. I'm talking about what you said, our little Mare. I've told you not to call me that. I am 200 years older than you, Sir Eugene. Then it looks like our little Granny Mare is pretty shy. Wanna die? Mare's shoulders seemed to be heaving with anger. But even so, Eugene didn't feel any killing intent flowing his way. Since she had been teased like this for 2 years now, it looked like Mare had gotten used to it. Besides, they both knew Mare wasn't serious while saying that and didn't really hate it when Eugene treated her like that. It was strange, novel and nostalgic. Among all the wizards who had been granted entry into Akron over these hundreds of years, not a single one of them had treated Mare like a young child. Although some fools occasionally wanted to dissect Mare and witchcraft under the foolish pretext of doing research, most wizards kept a certain distance from Mare, making it difficult for her to talk to them. They had no choice but to treat Mare that way. Mare was a familiar who had been personally crafted by the wise Sienna, and based on a childhood version of herself at that. She also served as the artificial intelligence of witchcraft, the greatest grimoire in all of magic history. Even though they had already dissected it once, all the wizards who had experienced the contents of witchcraft were in awe of Mare. However, Eugene wasn't like that. There was no reason for him to follow that trend. Respect for the wise Sienna? Although he could admit that she was a great wizard, to Eugene Sienna was just Sienna. Eugene got straight to the point. Do you hate that I'm leaving? Mare hesitated to reply. See, now you do hate it. To think that it's already been 2 years since I first came here. Though it seems I'm the only one who regularly comes and goes from this floor, Eugene noted sympathetically. It's unavoidable, Mare mumbled as she loosened her tightly clenched fists. Because the other wizards have already finished examining witchcraft long ago. It had been 2 years since Eugene first entered Akron. He had been visiting Akron almost every day since then and had spent around half of his waking hours in Sienna's hall. This wasn't particularly impressive or surprising. All the wizards who were allowed to enter Akron, like Eugene, diligently immersed themselves in the study of magic. Most of the wizards who received permission to enter Akron had overwhelming pride and confidence in their magical abilities. But by refining their abilities even further, these wizards sought to reach the ultimate truths. So wasn't it just natural? Mare had been in existence for over 200 years. The wizards who had been permitted to enter Akron were now either tower masters, heads of the Wizards Guild, a member of Aratha's court wizards, or part of the royal family of Arath. They had all been born with a rarely seen gift for magic, and by now they had already proven themselves as wizards. For them, witchcraft was an amazing piece of magic that their predecessor had left behind. The ultimate point of circle magic. the eternal whole. If one was a wizard who had encountered witchcraft for the first time, they couldn't help but be stunned and in awe of its greatness. Over their next few visits, these wizards would take their time to try to understand and explore the contents of witchcraft. But they would eventually realize that this truth wasn't something that they could grasp just yet. From then on, their visits would decrease. Although witchcraft was a great piece of magic, the arch-wizards who were allowed to enter Akron had already established their own magic formulas, and none were in a position where they could fully devote themselves to replicating witchcraft. Their admiration and astonishment wouldn't fade, and they would reference witchcraft for their own magic. But, in the end, they would seek to complete their own unique magic formula through independent research. In this respect, Eugene was unique. Or at least that's what he looked like in Mare's view. It might be because he was young, or it might just be because he had yet to establish his own magic formula. Or maybe it was just that he was a flexible thinker. Or could it be due to having little pride in his identity as a wizard? It was probably all these things combined. In these 2 years, Eugene had spent half his accrued time within Akron immersed in witchcraft without ever fainting or getting a nosebleed. Every session, after spending quite some time perusing witchcraft, he would then emerge to study the magic texts stored in Sienna's hall. What meaning was there in watching that scene over and over again, when he wouldn't be able to understand it anyway? It was said that a crow-tit will only tear its crotch if it tried to walk like a crane, but the level of Eugene's magical skill compared to that required for witchcraft wasn't even up to the same level as the crow-tit's crotch. Instead, it was more like the difference between the earthworm and a dragon or a bug and a god. He had set his sights far too high. It was probably because he was a young master of the Lionheart clan, which was a step above even the most prestigious families. And he wasn't just any young master. No, he was a young master who had once been a collateral descendant and was the first in history to be adopted into the main family after being recognized for his talents, wasn't he? It seemed obvious to others that Eugene was lost in his own genius and had set his sights on a height impossible for him to reach. However, Eugene was able to comprehend witchcraft. No, could that really be called comprehension? It was more along the lines of pounding it straight into his head. Mare had been watching over Eugene for 2 years now, but she still couldn't accept that Eugene's behavior was in any way reasonable. Mare finally asked, "If you really do manage to complete the thesis, will you be leaving Aroth?" Eugene returned her question with his own. "Do you know just how many times you've asked me that? If you include today, then it's the 137th time. That sounds about right. Since I started writing my thesis about half a year ago, it means you've asked me that question about once a day." "There were 2 days when I didn't ask that question," Mare insisted poutily. "Fine. If I have to be honest, I don't want you to leave Aroth." "If I don't leave, what would I be doing here?" Eugene asked her. "You can do whatever you like. I don't know when the Red Tower Master might be retiring, but..." "Sir Eugene, if you say you wish to become the next Tower Master, the current Red Tower Master would probably approve you as his successor without hesitation." "I have no intentions of becoming a Tower Master." "Then how about the court wizards? Isn't Tremple Vizardo also extremely interested in recruiting you?" Tremple Vizardo was the commander of Arotha's court wizards. Since about a year ago he had been trying to get close to Eugene to recruit him for a position in the court wizards. "Crown Prince Honian also greatly favors you, Sir Eugene. In my opinion, Crown Prince Honian's line is one that will be able to continue to proudly make a name for itself over the next few decades, until it even reaches outside of Aroth," Mare continued to persuade him. "Although I'm grateful for the Crown Prince's favor, that also doesn't appeal to me," Eugene rejected the suggestion. "You won't be able to become the patriarch anyway, so why do you have to return to the Lionheart clan?" Mare argued. Eugene just asked, "Do I really need such an amazing reason just to go home?" "And since when were you so attached to your home?" Mare asked sulkily. When she had first heard him mention his thesis, Mare hadn't thought much about it. This was because even though Eugene's accomplishments were astonishing, it would be by no means an easy feat to establish his findings in a thesis. However, Eugene's growth far exceeded Mare's imagination. It had only been half a year since he started writing his thesis, but Eugene had already neatly organized his previously vague magic theories into a coherent hypothesis. During the process, he had managed to advance his own unique magic formula by several steps. "That thesis, do you really have no intention of publishing it?" Mare asked. "I don't," Eugene replied with a shake of his head. This thesis is just for my self-satisfaction. In any case, other than me, no one else would truly be able to make use of it. So I'm just using it to tidy up the details of my magic formula by writing it all down. This meant that Eugene didn't really need to write a perfect thesis. Mare had already heard him say so dozens of times before. That was why Mare refused to retract her pouting lips. As it was a thesis written solely for self-satisfaction, there was no reason for him to worry too much about the quality of the paper, as it wasn't going to be presented to a panel anyway. Although that was the case, Eugene wasn't going to casually write just anything. The thesis he had been working on for over half a year would be examined by Eugene's teacher, the Red Tower Master, Lovelian. It was Lovelian who had first brought up the opinion that there was no need for Eugene to publish his thesis. This ring flame formula can't be reproduced by any other wizard. Regardless of how advanced their understanding of magic is, it would be physically impossible for them to replicate it. Eugene didn't use the normal circle magic formula. It's also not something that can be reproduced by the white flame formula users of the Lionheart's main family. Instead, Eugene had replaced the circle with the stars from the white flame formula. I've also attempted to reproduce your results by following your thesis. I was stalled right from the beginning because I haven't formed a core, nor have I learned the white flame formula. So I tried to use my circles as a replacement, but I wasn't able to replicate your results, Eugene. Instead, my mana seemed to flow backward. In order to copy Witchcraft's Eternal Whole, Eugene had adapted the Eternal Whole to use the stars of his white flame formula in place of the circles. He was currently at the 4th star of the white flame formula. With these 4 stars he made a circle. Then inside this circle, just as Hamel had done in his past life, he would ignite his mana to set off a chain of explosions. The exploding mana would then be refined into countless circles that would then be intertwined with each other to create more circles. On the outside, the spinning ring of flames in his pseudo-circle would tightly bind his stars, preventing any mana from leaking out. This was the ring flame formula. Originally, he had intended to attempt something similar once he reached the 5th star of the white flame formula, but the timing had been pushed forward due to his meeting with Witchcraft. Learning magic every day allowed him to stimulate his mana, and as a result, it also increased his progress in the white flame formula. The 2 years he had spent at Aroth couldn't be described as simply hectic. They were far more intense than that. He had become Lovelian's disciple, so while half of his waking hours were spent studying in Akron, the other half was spent learning magic from Lovelian. As an archwizard, Lovelian could clearly tell what level Eugene had reached. Apart from a strong foundation in mana control, Eugene only knew the basics. Lovelian didn't give Eugene any lessons on the vital arrangement of formulas or the attunement of mana used to create spells. He felt there was no need to teach Eugene any of that, and Lovelian's judgment was soon proven correct. During Eugene's previous life as Hamel, with only a poor mana training scripture as his foundation, he had become strong enough to serve as Vermouth's companion. Hamel was one of the protagonists during the war with Helmuth, and he was right there alongside the others when they had killed 3 of the 5 demon kings. All while only having learned such a common and cheap mana training scripture. So Lovelian only taught Eugene various spells. And among the myriad of spells that he knew, he taught Eugene only the most useful. He tried to simplify their complicated formulas as much as possible, then left it solely up to Eugene to figure out how to arrange his mana to cast these spells. After Eugene had managed to establish his ring flame formula to a certain extent, Lovelian had provided his helpful critique as Eugene began to write his thesis. He had also assisted in adapting the existing circle spells to fit Eugene's unique magic formula. There wasn't really a need for Lovelian to do so, as it was possible to cast the usual circle spells with the ring flame formula. However, if Eugene was going to be using his own unique magic formula, wouldn't it be better for him to use improvised spells so that they were both stronger and easier to cast? Are you upset? Eugene asked Mare. Mare harumphed. Why would I be upset? Because I said I'll be leaving even though you asked me to stay. I'm not upset. What right do I have to stop you from leaving? Sir Eugene, if you say you're going, then you can just go. Although I've never thought about wanting to go somewhere, even if I did, I'm just a familiar who can't leave Akron. The more Mare talked, the further her lips protruded in her pout. That's why you should just feel free to leave. You can just leave me here all alone in this boring, dull and quiet place while you go off by yourself. I'm not at all disappointed about parting ways with you, with whom I've been playing for these past 2 years. After all, I'm not really a living human being and I know full well that humans are just selfish creatures. Is that so? Eugene calmly asked. Of course I'm well aware of this. Because I'm 200 years older than you. Even so, Sir Eugene, please at least come and see me before you leave. Don't just leave without saying anything like Lady Sienna, Mare pleaded. All right, Eugene readily agreed. Even though I've said all this, you're still as calm as ever. Though it feels like I've thought this hundreds of times over these past 2 years. You really are a piece of trash, Mare grumbled. Eugene argued, why am I a piece of trash? Because I just get that feeling from you. It doesn't matter if there's a reason or not. You, Sir Eugene, are simply trash. You're really so annoying. Even though you're a lot younger than me, you haven't shown me any respect as your senior. If an adult tells you to do something, shouldn't you just be a good child and accept the order obediently? As she grumbled these words, Mare picked up the hat she had placed next to her and put it back on her head, covering her face in embarrassment. Of course, if you were to be truly persuaded by my words and chose not to leave Aroth, then I'm sure I would feel extremely distressed because of that, Mare haltingly admitted. But I can't help it. As my personality is based on Lady Sienna's childhood, my emotions and behavior can't help but be influenced by a childish temper. Eugene seemed doubtful. Is that really the case? Yes, of course that's the case, Mare insisted. That's why I say such childish things and show a child's stubbornness. Even under such circumstances, part of me still accepts that it's your right to leave. That's why I still feel like an idiot for uttering such nonsensical words. Because I'm sure that Lady Sienna wouldn't act like this. I feel like my actions are an insult to Lady Sienna. Eugene hesitated. That's why you should just treat my words like air. Since I'm just being childishly stubborn about this, there's no need for you to pay attention to what I'm saying. It's not like there's any point to it and I don't really have anything I can offer you, Mare meekly conceded. Maybe, Eugene said even as the pen he was using to write his thesis continued to move. But the real Lady Sienna might have acted just like you. Please don't say something so nonsensical. There's no way that Lady Sienna would do that. No, she would have. And how would you know that, Sir Eugene? When you've never even met the real Lady Sienna. Could you really be saying that while thinking of Lady Sienna as she's depicted in the fairy tale? Mare asked as she lifted up her hat, revealing her face. Pfft. Mare blew a raspberry at Eugene. In the end, that was just something someone wrote while using their imagination. Mare scolded him. I knew Lady Sienna. She wasn't that kind of person. My thesis should be finishing soon, Eugene declared as he childishly returned Mare's raspberry with one of his own. As long as I don't get too needlessly ambitious with it, I'll probably be able to finish it before the end of summer. So what about it? Mare asked grumpily. I'll definitely come looking for you before I leave. I might just have something I'll need to say to you at that moment, you know? Eugene teased. Mare demanded, what is it? Are you trying to provoke me? I really will kill you. I'll tell you at that time, Eugene replied with a smile.